Hello, everyone. I hope you and all yours are safe and healthy and happy and in hearty, ready for holidays mood. I really thank you all for joining. I'm Sumit Grover, your host for this session, and it is my pleasure to be among such inspirational leaders, and I cannot wait to learn from their life stories. To our beloved audience, a warm welcome to you all. This holiday season being upon us, I'm sure you had so many things planned. If you're in India on an evening, I'm sure you were ready for some nice dinner or a getaway with long weekend coming up, or maybe trying to finish work quickly based on what time zone you're in. But you chose to be here, which means this matters to you as much as it matters to us. So we are truly grateful for that. Well, talking about the season of joy and giving, or being with the loved ones, or just being thankful, we started with giving a gift of education to girl children, something we do through our Nanhi Kali initiative. Project Nanhi Kali, as some of you know, the word Nanhi means small and Kali means bud, so little girls, is a participatory project where you can sponsor the education of an underprivileged girl child for a minimum period of 1 year. For as little as 70 US dollars, you can support a girl studying for an entire year. And as a sponsor, you will also receive the picture and the profile of the Nanhi Kali, followed by regular progress reports, I promise. If you wish to join this mission and donate this holiday season, please use the link that Ashmeet is sharing in the chat now. And to know more on how you can join us to our growing list of over 500,000 Nanhi Kalis who are proud and well educated already, thanks to sponsors like yourselves. Let's spread love, smiles, and education this holiday season. All right, back to our session. Today marks a very special episode because it's the last episode of our season 3, Women in Leadership series. Debbie, I can't believe it's been 3 years since we started an honest chat about somewhat difficult, some controversial topics, all packed with power and experience. I'm deeply honored today to be joined by Andrea Chin, Nicole Little, and Christina Aguilera. What a cast for the finale indeed. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for doing this with us today. We live in a world inundated with stereotypes of gender, age, name, beauty, conformations, conformity, affinity, contrast, or just perception bias. I'm sure, like me, you have heard this many times. Be conscious of your unconscious biases. But how? While I was thinking about it, for someone like me who was born and raised in India, the realization started much earlier at home with my mother. Many of us have been doing a lot of things intentionally for our mothers, and I'm sure you can relate with this. Um, don't you think there are so many first lessons doing things for our mother intentionally, and it got us on a journey on changing the notions of unconscious bias. At least for me, it did. So I would like to thank my mother for this again, for bringing the intentional inclusion mindset, starting with her. Our goal today is to enable the building blocks for an open, flexible, and an aggregated environment which encourages inclusion. And I'm not going to bore you with my spiel on it. Let's hear it from the experts. So without further ado, let's kick off this holiday season grand finale with my dear friend and TechM's fearless leader, Debbie Menon, and our special guests, Christina, Andrea, and Nico. Take it away, Debbie.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking Sumit's mother for inspiring him to inspire us. So it has been 3 years of running these sessions, and it's really been fulfilling. Last spring, we ran a session on mind your cues. So the Q is the IQ, EQ, which is emotional intelligence, or SQ, which is social quotient. So I'm thinking today it would be really great if we could come up with a new Q and call it awareness quotient. So what do we mean by that? But let's go through today's session, and I think we're going to figure out what that means. But while you're doing it, think about your own awareness quotient and maybe try to rank it on a 1 to 10 and see where you are now, and we'll come back to it at the end. So the goal, as Sumit just said here today, is to look for tools that can help us become more intentional by including women. But including women is one thing, but doing it in an appropriate manner is another. So let's just go ahead and start making some introductions. Christina, why don't we start with you, introduce yourself, and then why don't you go ahead and introduce Nicole?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you today. I'm Christine Aguilera. I'm with Amazon Studios. I am also the president of Women in Technology Hollywood Foundation, which is a charitable organization that is really looking to grow the pipeline of women in the tech space, as well as support women in the industry. So we support local charities that reach young girls all the way up through adult women looking to get back into the workforce. We also facilitate conversations around professional development, mentoring, networking, and we consult on DEI initiatives as well. So that's definitely a passion area for me. And that's kind of a little bit about who I am. And I wanted to give you a little background about Nicole as well, because she and I have known each other for several years now. I first met Nicole when I worked at Disney Studios prior to Amazon Studios. I was immediately drawn to what a strong and honestly brilliant woman that she was, or is, definitely is. I loved her no nonsense personality and that she always spoke her mind. She reached back out to me several months ago to reconnect. And it was then that I felt like I really wanted to connect her with some of my colleagues here at Amazon Studios. I knew that this particular team really needed some female energy, and that her experience and expertise would definitely fill some gaps that the team needed to fill. Once I made the introductions, I personally just stepped away and let them work through the process, but I loved observing from the sidelines as Nicole was able to navigate through the many options that she had in front of her to advance her career. My connections and actions with Nicole and this team were absolutely intentional, which I think is a great example of how we can definitely choose our actions and be intentional in how we proceed with our everyday activities. And with that, I'll pass it over to Nicole so she can tell you a little bit about herself as well.
Thank you, Christina. Can everybody hear me okay still? Sure. Yeah, so hi, I'm Nicole Little. I am head of anti-piracy for Amazon Prime Video. As Christina mentioned, I came over from Disney, but I've worked in technology literally my entire career. So I moved from video games all the way back in 2008 through standard vendor technologies and then into now video content and distribution. One of the major areas that I've always kept in the forefront of my mind, though, is not only am I a woman in the technology space, so that can always be a little jarring, no matter where in the world I'm at. But also just because I'm feeling tensions or people's biases, I try and be very cognizant of the fact that if I'm feeling it, there are other people who are likely feeling similar or maybe even worse biases. So I try and use my both awareness and privilege that very few people will push as hard on me if I am outspoken or a little more forceful and requiring attention. And that's always been my focus pretty much outside of career even, is everybody else should get a chance. So that's why I liked the topic and why I enjoy working with Christina and really other people who have awareness that we need to make intentional choices in our lives, or else it just becomes kind of a weird gray area.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Let's move it over to you, Andrea.
Everyone. My name is Andrea Chin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Digital PMO for Ingram Micro. I've been here about a year, and prior to that, I was in Prestige Beauty, and prior to that, in financial services, but always in technology and always the minority. So always usually the only woman in the room. And so I kind of got used to it, right? But you know what? I wanted to change that dynamics, especially for my daughter and her generation. And so a passion project of mine is sending the ladder back down for other women in technology. And so super happy to be here today to share some tools and tips and tricks. Back
Well,
to you,
we're
Debbie.
super excited to have you, all of you here today. So it'll be great. You know, I was thinking about my career and was thinking about all the changes that I've seen, and I'm sure you have as well over the years. So I think the Me Too movement, the abortion issue that is still an issue, any cause that comes up creates conversation and it brings women's issues to the table. And I think that's when people are more open to change because they're more aware of the issues. Another big, huge scenario that I've seen is more women supporting women today than ever. That was, trust me, not the case when I started my career. But it's people like Nicole and Andrea and Christina, when you speak up, you help us with tools in our arsenal, and that creates profound change. So I nudge all of you that are listening today to do the same. But you know, let's get into this. Let's get into the meat. Let's talk about unconscious bias. It kind of reminds me of something where if somebody drank too much, they're giving an excuse. Okay, they were drunk. Well, guess what? It's the same thing with unconscious bias. You're getting no excuses anymore. But I also wanted to say, since unconscious bias goes to so many different topics and causes, let's stay focused on women for this session. But if you think about a simple equation, okay, A plus B equals C, it's as simple as you get. But when it comes to this topic, it's not so simple. But if you think about the word unconscious bias, and let's say that's your A, and then you're moving it to a conscious awareness, that would be your B. Does it equal intentional inclusion, which would be your C? Sounds simple, so let's try to make it simple for everybody here. So the first question, as I was just saying, let's give no more excuses for somebody to be unconscious with their bias. Who wants to take on that topic? The no excuse policy. Christina.
Yeah. So this is an area that I'm incredibly passionate about. The reality is that the term unconscious bias gives individuals an out, and that's not okay. So if someone makes a mistake, they may apologize, they may change their behavior. If they continue to make that mistake, then they haven't learned from it, and it has a negative reflection on that individual. And to me, it has that negative reflection because the term mistake has a negative connotation. With the term unconscious bias, there is no negative connotation. The term alone continues to allow individuals to repeat their behaviors without learning from their actions because it's considered unconscious. And personally, I'm not okay with that. I feel that the term unconscious bias should be removed from our vocabulary. We really need to flip the narrative. We need to hold people accountable for their choices and their actions. And we need to insist that how they treat others becomes an intentional act. We shouldn't be giving them any more excuses to behave poorly. So I really feel passionate in this space, and I'm hoping that today's conversation can help us start flipping the narrative, because it's not okay.
Okay, I think you did a great job on setting the stage there. So let's kind of go around the horn here and talk about this topic and see what examples we might have. So example would be, have you ever been asked to be in a meeting because you're a woman? And that sounds like a good thing, right? Let's talk about it in a minute. Have you ever been overlooked for promotion? Have you ever been asked to take notes? And unconsciously, it's because you're a woman, you're being asked to take notes. Well, these things happen still on a daily basis, but we need to change the paradigm. So I think it'd be really helpful if you guys could just give us some real life examples and maybe tools on how you handled the situation. So that way it'll help all of us if we come up to the scenario. So Let's start with Andrea. When you were in Singapore, I know you've got a really good story. I don't want to ruin it, so I'm going to let you take it over.
Yeah, sure. I had the opportunity to work in Singapore for a year. And, when I got there, and again, I live in New York, so fast talker, I'm saying like, know my stuff, right? And so I walked into a room. It was my first week on the job. And I had my little notepad and I sat at the table, right? It was a pretty large conference rooms with lots of chairs. And so I was just, early, a couple minutes early, kind of getting situated. And, a gentleman walks in and he said, "Why are you sitting at the table and who are you?" I said, "My name is Andrea Chin. I'm here from New York. I'm here to share best practices, etc." And when people were filing into the room, I noticed that all the men sat at the table, but all the women sat in the chairs behind the table, kind of like the overflow, when there are not enough chairs at the table. And so I didn't say anything. I just stood there, and I just sat there, and I kept on going. And then later, I approached some women, and I said, "Why didn't you guys sit at the table?" And they said, "You have to be invited to be able to sit at the table," right? And I said, "Oh, okay." And so the next day, when I was in the same conference room, I invited them all to sit at the table, right? And that was a statement in itself, right? Because I invited them to sit at the table. And these were managing directors, these were senior vice presidents who had something to say. But unless you're at the table, you're not going to really say it. And so through the course of that year when I was there, I practiced with them. We practiced speaking in meetings. We practiced having our bullets and having our data points. We practiced with each other so that they had a voice and they were heard. And I also amplified when they said something, I would reiterate it. And I would say, "That's a great point, Susan," or that's a wonderful, insight, right? Just so that, it's kind of like plussing their statement, right? Before someone else kind of took credit for their statement because they weren't loud enough or they actually didn't say it with enough, conviction. So that was my story. And I think that a lot of women really it was really powerful, right, for me to come in and then actually flip the narrative, right, Christina? Right? It was like, we were in the meeting. We weren't there to take notes. We were there to contribute, right? And so why would you sit in a 1-hour meeting and not say a single thing, right?
You were hired to talk, right?
Yeah.
But what I like about your example there is that you watched this happen and then you did something about it. You actually helped these women with tools to provoke change. So that's a great example. Nicole, do you want to jump in on this topic? Any example you might have with tools or how you handled it?
So I actually have a new story to share, which sounds weird. It's actually kind of a two-sided piece. So frequently, I've spent my entire life in the hacking community. I love technology, the hardware, anything that has to do with it. I want to be in the thick of it and want to know as much as possible. But I also know that some of this carries the obvious bias of what am I doing here? And going to conferences and things like that, I've experienced where people will approach my husband to speak to him because they assume I have come with him to the conference, and he is both aware and gracious enough to immediately shunt them over to me. He even goes as far to say, "I don't know any of this. I can barely turn the TV on," to try and help play it up of, "No, I'm here with my wife who's supposed to be here." But I'd say that every time I go to a conference, at least once, I have the experience of meeting somebody and discussing what I work on and my interests. And they immediately tell me, "Oh, that's surprising. You don't look like what I would expect." Which for me is always a very jarring question or jarring statement to hear. One, because I don't understand what they mean. And two, it creates the doubt of, what should I look a certain way? And rather than kind of let that sit and fester, I always ask, "Well, what do you mean?" Because I need to know. Why do you think I don't fit in here? Is it my stature? Is it how I look? Is it how I present myself? And sometimes people will unknowingly say really terrible things of like, "I wouldn't expect a woman to have an interest in these things," which is super strange to hear based on visually how I look. that you may not think I have an interest in it, but also sometimes I do hear technically positive things where somebody will say, "Oh, you're very soft-spoken and too well put together. I don't expect for you to be in this space." But either one, they kind of take you aback and show this bias of this area of interest and this career path, really. People assume that you have to be a very specific, rigid form. And if you're a woman here, then you have an even more specific kind of ideal to meet. It's very difficult because you don't know what everybody's ideal might be. So in business settings, sometimes I guess I come across as too not hacker looking, but in other settings, I look too much like a business person. So it's a hard balance to have.
Nicole, so I think what you just said there is this scenario happened to you, and what you did is you asked them a question. Why do I not look like somebody that could be in this business? And then however they answer it, you could ask them another question and just keep drilling down into it. So that's a tool on how you can help, with change. So Christina, do you want to jump in on this topic? And also, if I asked you, Christina, could you interview for this job, or could you be in this meeting because you're a woman? How would you respond to that?
Well, let me give you some examples, and then I'll definitely share how I'd respond to that. So I think the example that I have, and I think the commonalities between all three of these scenarios, is awareness, and making sure that people are aware of where they have made their assumptions. So I've definitely been in scenarios where I was, the traditional, everyone has experiences this, where I was expected to organize the function or take the notes or get the coffee or, those traditional roles that people seem to assume we should take on as women. But it shouldn't be assumed. So my male colleagues in those scenarios were not asked to take on these roles. And one way that I addressed this simply was directly with the requester in those scenarios, and just make sure that they were aware that there are others that can take on these activities, and it doesn't necessarily need to be me because I'm female. But another way that I've addressed it is with my male colleagues directly. I've been transparent with them as well, and many of them have opted in when they observe this occurring to step up and take on those activities directly, so it wasn't assumed that it should be me, and kind of correct the behavior around me. So I personally also appreciate that, because it doesn't always put the onus directly on myself to address the issue if others see it, are aware, and try to fix it as well. So they're participating in really the solutions. So the support and awareness of your peers in those situations is just as important as the awareness of those directly putting you into a situation. In regards to how I would respond if I was asked to join a meeting just because I was female, or join into this activity because I was female, it makes the assumption of wanting to, or the request of asking you to join because of your gender, is not great. Like, it makes you think, should I have a seat at this table? Am I being asked because of my expertise and my experience? Or am I being asked simply because I'm female? So you have to bring that awareness to those that are putting that request forward, and really kind of fix the situation personally right away. That's what I feel. And I know, Nicole, you and I have talked about this topic as well in regards to being asked to participate just because we're female. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in those instances, it's really important not only to address it with the person asking so that they understand, because a lot of times I think that because it's unconscious, they don't realize that they're putting us in a position, even if it's not just a woman, it could be a person of color. You're putting that person in the position of essentially having to rain on the parade but also having to kind of stand up for themselves. Because if you're asking a person to join a panel or a conversation or a meeting just based on an attribute about themselves they can't change, then it creates this expectation around it of, well, do you want me there because of my skill and my expertise and my presence? Or do you want me there because you want to show people that you have me? Not me as a person, but the body in the seat. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that while they're trying to be inclusive, they create that negative feeling of, so you're only asking me because I'm a woman, or you're only asking me because I'm from this country, if it's not specifically related to like that topic. And it just doesn't come up for them because they're like, but I'm trying to help. And what they don't realize is trying to help is like the best first step, but you have to try and help broader. So don't just ask me because I'm a woman. Ask me and 3 other people who also have these things. Like, very few meetings have a limitation of the number of people you can invite. So maybe invite some other people from other backgrounds to get a diverse kind of thought base. Because if you're inviting me just because I'm a woman, my opinions of whatever we're participating in immediately are going to be a lot more harsh or negative, because all I'm thinking is, well, now I have to prove myself, or now I have to work extra hard to essentially show you that I deserve to be here, irrespective of my gender or my nationality or ethnicity. So that's
I think that's
usually what I try and do.
I think that's an example of somebody wanting to include you because they're a woman, so they're aware. But let's do it in an appropriate manner and say it's because of your skill set and you're a woman, and we thank you for that. You know what I mean? It's just about being aware and being appropriate, right? So let's kind of go through that equation I was talking about earlier on, which was moving from unconscious bias to actually being aware. So there are some people that can be aware, but they still might be biased and aware. Now that's called, that is actually called conscious bias, and that's also a thing. So thinking about this, Christina, let me ask you something. How do you change the paradigm of conscious bias? Now this is, I am aware, to intentional inclusion. And I want to say that Christina is the one who, let's just say, coined the term intentional inclusion. I'm sure you've got a story there. If you want to jump in on that, that'd be great.
I think ultimately it was at a time of reflection several years ago. Personally, I had just completed a training on unconscious bias, and honestly, I was a bit annoyed by it. I just didn't understand how the term itself continued to allow the behavior, in my opinion. I really wanted action, I wanted change. So I was, just in that reflection, mentally challenging myself to determine how we change, like asking myself, well, how do we fix this? If I'm annoyed, others are annoyed too. Like, I can't be the only one that's noticing this. And to me, it started with removing the acceptance of the underlying behaviors. And in order to do that, we needed to flip the narrative, and we needed to make our actions intentional. Instead of allowing the unconscious actions, from that point forward, I began talking about intentional inclusion. And that was the term that, in my mind, removed the allowance of the behaviors and the actions. So I dropped it into conversations, I brought it up at conferences, and I figured maybe if I continued to change the narrative myself, then maybe it would catch on with others as well. So to me, just having this conversation today with this group is very rewarding, because I feel like there's still hope. We can do this. And by bringing awareness and, really establishing some mechanisms and some intentional actions in our everyday lives, then maybe we can have hope that this is no longer acceptable behavior.
Well, I think it helps to have people like the 3 of you leading the charge, and it will make a change for sure. Andrea, do you want to jump in on this discussion on the topic of kind of moving from awareness to intentional inclusion?
I mean, I lived and breathed it, right? I actually, before Christina even coined the phrase, right? I brought those women from the back to the table, right? And so, a part of what I do on a daily basis is actually, look for the woman to actually, and sometimes it's about planting the seed to say, like, I'm going to mention you in today's meeting, right? I'm going to point to you and I'm going to ask you to have a point of view, right? And so people are like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, because you have, a data point, a valid data point, and a really good one. And so I'm going to amplify your voice in this meeting. And so the women are actually really thankful, right? That again, as a senior woman in the organization, I'm actually calling them out and helping them along in their journey and helping them by their confidence to speak in a large group, right? In a large meeting. Because sometimes people are shy, right? And so again, I'm intending for them to actually be included, right? But I'm going out of my way. And sometimes it takes extra prep. Sometimes I have to help them find that data nugget. But again, how do we kind of get more of the women in the room is by, again, forcing the issue. So again, happy to do it, happy to have women mentees, and even women interns, right? Again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but in terms of candidate slates, so I do a lot of hiring, right? I make sure that I have a diverse candidate slate for the role, right? So it's not just that person has those skills, et cetera. I go out of my way to make sure that I have diverse candidates in the interview process for everyone to interview, just so that you could have the diversity of thought.
Love it. Good job. Hey, Nicole, you're the recipient of intentional inclusion. Did you know that your friend Christina was doing this when you went through the job process?
So I knew that Christina was kind of championing me through the process. But to be honest, I hadn't really considered it as like an intentional inclusion. Because I try to see a lot of my interactions as this person sees that I can do this job or solve this problem the way that they're looking for. And that's why they've come to me. So it's both great that I didn't feel like I was being brought in just because I was a woman. But also it is nice to know that somebody not only brought me in because of my skills, but it's an additional benefit that I can also bring a diverse mindset to the group. So that was great. I know sometimes it can feel a little awkward if you don't know maybe that you're being brought in intentionally, because even if it's just the two of you or a smaller group, it does feel a little not uncomfortable. Just it's like when you first put on a pair of shoes. You're like, well, I'll get used to them and it'll feel fine. But if you first notice the sensation of I have attention on me now, it can be a little jarring. But like I said, it is nice and it feels validating.
Good. I'm sure you're happy to be the recipients. Let's talk about tools. We had mentioned a mechanism that can help a corporation go from unconscious to conscious to intentional. Christina, I think you've got an example of that.
I think from this conversation, you can really hear that like the folks in this chat right now we're conscious, we're aware, we intentionally change our actions. But for those who are not aware or less aware, in order for them to change their actions and change how they behave, then we have to establish mechanisms. And in my opinion, we have to establish those consistencies and expectations in our everyday activities so that they practice and the expectation and actions are set for them. So for an example of a mechanism that I can think of, and Amazon's pretty good at it, is in the hiring practices when we are considering candidates or particular candidates are going through the interviewing process. For example, if I'm a female and I'm going through an interview process, I want to see my representation. I want to know that there are others like me at this organization who I can talk to and ensure that it's a good fit culturally. So making sure that you have diverse interviewers, making sure that you have diverse candidates, that ensuring that we have those mechanisms throughout the hiring process, I think is a really good example of, just making sure that we are holding people accountable for their choices and their actions. I'm sure there's many other examples in our everyday work activities or personal lives where we can also establish some additional mechanisms to make sure that it's top of mind.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Debbie.
Either one of you, Andrea, jump in.
Yeah. So we have an Ingram Micro Women's Forum, right, where the women come together once a month. We have quarterly events, and we've actually launched a program called Push Plus Promote. So 3 Ps, right? Pushing folks, again, to be more comfortable with being uncomfortable. Promoting women, so actually bringing, female candidates to, the table in terms of put your name in the hat, right? In terms of going for the promotion or going for the, the stretch assignment. And then plus is, again, like what I said, right? Plus somebody in a meeting. If someone says something, say that's a great idea, or say, we didn't think about that, right? And tell us more, Debbie, about that, or tell us more, Nicole, about that idea, right? But plussing someone's idea publicly is a great way to kind of like elevate them as well. So that's a program that we're really spearheading within Ingram, and I think it's gonna really be helpful because we have DE&I metrics that we're gonna have to hit, right, in our scorecard, right? So women leadership at the top, right? Women leadership in different divisions, percentages that we want to meet, as part of our goals. So it'll be interesting to watch it, kind of going into January and throughout 2023.
I love that example. And I think Pranav just put it in the chat for us all to remember. I'm going to jump into Nicole for a second. You are part of the UCLA Executive MBA program, and I know you talk a lot about some of these issues there, but you'd mentioned something to me about white men start at 0, diversity starts at -1 or -2. Okay, what does that mean?
So I will say this is not an official UCLA
Yes.
idea, but it's something that in kind of the spaces with the other executives in the MBA program, we have had to discuss with our classmates, especially our white male classmates, that when they walk into a meeting, no one assumes less of them. Unless they've done something terrible and everybody knows about it, no one assumes that they will not be able to perform at the level that is expected. However, when you come into a space as a woman, a person of color, sometimes even somebody who has a name that sounds unfamiliar, you're already at below baseline. So on kind of if you were to look at the scale, your standard white man in a corporate environment, he starts at 0. And women and people of color and people from disadvantaged or underserved communities, they already start far below 0 because they have to work just to get up to, I am just as good as you, which is a really tough road to hoe when you have to think about it both internally, because it does make you question, am I really as good as these people? And those are terrible kind of concepts to have in your mind, because you should never think of yourself in the concept of as good as, because you are as good as you. So like it does create that negative kind of headspace, but also it creates the burden of, I maybe have boundaries in place, but I'm going to feel not obligated, but it's going to make me feel like maybe I need to put some of those boundaries aside so that I can prove that I should be here. And that's never a place that you want to have anybody. So trying to be aware of that as you conduct business and as you have group interactions is really helpful, because sometimes people don't, unfortunately, they don't know that they are coming in at that negative in some spaces. They may not know that people are not giving them as much weight because of their name. And so kind of banding together, and even sometimes you need to tell your team, like, look, I know I'm a woman in this space, so people are sometimes going to give me a hard time, but you're from these cultures and backgrounds, so some people may have an assumption about you, And we want to make sure that that also doesn't proliferate throughout our team. So if you see something, say something. And if I see something, I'm going to say something. That way we can create a safe space for all of us to try and just do our best instead of trying to perform against this imaginary kind of milepost that we don't even know where we are in relation to it.
But I think that is such a good topic to just bring up right now, because that's something we don't know is actually happening. We're not conscious of it. And what I have done a few times, I've called some of my colleagues and I said, do you mind, doing XYZ when we're in a meeting? Because that will help me. Let's just say I wasn't conscious of walking into a meeting at -1 or -2, but I know that I am. So I've asked them to help support me by asking me a question or pontificating on something I just said. So that's something that I think we could all continue to work on. It'll help them understand it better as well. So Andrew, I'm going to move over to you. The topic of unconscious bias, it's not just for women. We know that. I kind of said that at the beginning, but I just wondered if you want to talk at all about any tools that you've learned on the topic of like race and diversity and how you may have handled that in your past or seen with other people.
Yeah. So again, I'm Asian. You can see from my face. I'm a woman. I'm a mother, right? And
You're a
so
mother?
I'm a
No.
mother, yes. And so, sometimes I got chosen as that diversity person, right? Oh, we need a picture. Call Andrea, she'll come and be in the picture, right? And so it's, I always kind of got tagged as that. And but I played it up, right? I played it up, right? Because I wanted people to understand that, okay, I'm not here just because I'm Asian, or I'm not just the only woman in the room because of I'm a woman, right? Because of my sex, right? Um, and so again, I've always made sure that I said something smart in the meeting, right? To kind of, oh wow, she actually really does belong here, right? Not because she's a woman, because she has a point of view that matters, right? And again, I always say it's Andrea in a sea of men, right? And so when I walk into the room, it's like that. But again, it's really practice, right? And it's again working with other women, getting them kind of comfortable speaking up, right? And I think that take a mentor, tag a friend, right? Um, Bring someone along with you, right? And then it becomes easier, right? I can walk in a room and I can actually command the room sometimes when it's men, because men will have their own points of view, and I just say, stop. You guys are not looking at it from this angle, right? And then that light bulb goes off, and like that, they have that aha moment, right? Because they just don't have that sometimes, that perspective, right? And there's also so many other things. And I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but liken it like an iceberg. Okay, an iceberg, and I've been to Alaska a couple times, but you see this iceberg kind of floating around out there, but you only see the part above the water line, right? But there's a whole huge thing going on underneath, right? And that's with everyone, right? Everybody, you just see kind of the top, but you really kind of understand what's below and more in depth, right? And so, something that I've done this year intentionally is really just getting to know people at a more deeper level, not just because they look like that or because they talk like that, right, Nicole? But really getting to understand them, right? And so Ingram is great in terms of people first. And so, hey, are you not happy in your job? Because you seem a little off, right? What do you want to do? Let's get you over there where you actually will be happier, right? Have a purpose, right? And so just because someone's like good at coding and then you're keeping them in this little box, but really understanding what motivates them, right, to make them successful. And so those are my pearls of wisdom.
Okay, love the underwater
Iceberg.
scenario with the iceberg. That's good. Christine, I'm going to move over to you. You are the president of WITH. What is WITH and why are you the president?
So WITH is Women in Technology Hollywood Foundation. So we are officially a charitable organization as of 2019, 2020 timeframe, where we became a 501c3 as a nonprofit. And really, I've been involved with WITH since the inception, which was about 8 years ago. And it's definitely been an area where I've been drawn to help. I want to contribute. I want to see growth. I want to see change. And I've naturally been the type of person who has just become a mentor to many individuals that I know, whether it's personally or professionally, whether I've worked with them or not worked with them. I enjoy that. That's what gives me energy. That's what drives me. That's what I'm passionate about. I want to ensure that everyone feels supported and they have the right environment where they feel safe, um, and where they are set up for success. And there's so many different ways that we can approach this, but I think at the core and at the foundation, it all comes down to awareness. And how can we make change? And it's by growing the network, it's by growing the awareness in this space to ensure that people have the right environment and the right culture, and whether it's personally or professionally, and they have the right support system around them. So WITH is an area that I've been able to really hone that energy. So when they came to me a couple years ago about being president of Women in Technology Hollywood, I definitely was humbled because I didn't see myself able to take on that responsibility, but had the support around me as well to take the risk, take the jump. And it was something that I had to think about, but definitely felt it was important to make sure that we can grow this space and continue the conversation and ensure that everyone feels strong enough to have the conversation and bring up the topics and be candid and be honest with each other. So it's an area where I've really enjoyed the past couple years being president. We've grown to 6,000 members now. We are definitely seeing change in the space and awareness. So if others would like to continue to join on my path here with Women in Technology Hollywood, we do have a website, withollywood.org. Feel free to jump in there, check it out. There's a lot of information, as well as you can join our weekly, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and actually join in on our committees as well and contribute directly.
Pranav, do you mind putting that in the chat? That was
Hollywood.org.
Oh, Ashmeet's already on it. Thank you for that. Nicole, I'm going to go over to you for a second. No, I think we've done a good job of defining unconscious bias, and we've talked about awareness, we've talked about tools and mechanisms, et cetera. And what I'm kind of hearing is that when something happens, that you're suggesting that we handle it and take care of it right then, and that becomes a confrontation. So what if you're not comfortable with confrontation and you don't feel safe bringing up the issue, and you might be scared of retaliation or whatever topic it is, or what you look like by doing it, or anything? So what would you suggest to some people that might be uncomfortable?
Excuse me. Yeah, that's always going to be, I think, at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, is I don't want to make myself uncomfortable, and it's totally understandable. Like you kind of mentioned, I'm far more upfront and direct about it. I need to address it immediately, because the way that I understand how people work and how brains work, immediacy is important to cement whether or not this is or is not a mistake. So you've made a mistake, we should address it now before your brain has time to kind of let it dissipate out. But that's not always going to be the right choice for personalities and things like that. So in those cases, I try and tell people, as Andrea had mentioned, have a friend with you. You have to have a support system, because if you don't have any kind of framework or structure there, it can feel daunting and burdensome to even try and stand up for yourself, because it's just you against this unknown size of an entity. But also in those instances, take time to find people within the company, even if it's a mentor to reflect with. Usually it's better to have them outside of your immediate organization, because then you can get a little more perspective from other people who are working in parallel with you. And sometimes you do have to kind of touch base with HR. And I know that a lot of people have had discussions with HR teams or representatives, and it doesn't always result in anything, or it doesn't result in something that you feel is meaningful or impactful. But at least you've done it. So I always count that as, well, I've checked that off my list. And if that's not working, then find other ways. And sometimes you kind of have to do a little background work of meeting with other people to see, like, do you also feel this? So like I've had lunches with other female coworkers to see, like, has this person interacted with you the same way? Because I want to make sure I'm not a specific target, or it's not just like maybe I overanalyze something. And that can also be really helpful, even if there's not something you can do to fix that person's behavior. Having somebody to at least commiserate and discuss this with, decompress, and potentially even kind of plan for future support, I think is really important, and it helps bring you back from that verge of feeling burned out and hopeless.
You know what I like there? You know, when we get a puppy and you're trying to train your puppy and he has a little accident, that you need to tell him right then. But that doesn't always happen. It's kind of what you just
It's
said.
the immediacy.
No, the immediacy. You just did it. I'm going to respond to it. No, thank you for that answer. It was a good one. Sumit, I'm going to put you on the stage for a second. Are you ready? I'm not really even sure of my question. You're sitting here listening to these amazing women in the marketplace talking to us about this subject. Have you learned anything from them? Are you going to change anything? Do you need to? I'm no doubt your awareness level was already very high, and I've seen you do intentional inclusion, but is there anything you want to talk about from a male perspective?
Yes, my intentional inclusion is definitely not enough. I can say that in a very unconscious way, my intentional efforts are very, very little. I need to be more intentional. I need to talk a lot more about this. Every opportunity that we get. The reason why I brought the mother example is because I would strongly recommend everybody, whether man or a woman, please go and talk to your mother. You will find so many such examples. We've seen this. From a very young age, we all intentionally have done something or the other for our mothers. And there's so much to learn from all of you sitting here. There are so many examples that are coming to my mind listening to either push, plus, promote, Andrea, that you said, and examples, Nicole and Christina, that you gave. All I can say is in our team meetings and the next hire, there's going to be a big, big visible change. So thank you for putting me on the spot, Debbie. Loved it.
With only a couple minutes left, let's do this quickly. Let's go around the room here really fast and just do a quick 1 to 3 takeaways that you want to leave us with. Any do's or don'ts, or what's acceptable, what's not, whatever comes to mind. Who wants to go first? Andrea.
Okay, so I wrote some stuff down. Number one is be an empathetic leader, right? You never know what's going on at home. You never know what's going on, behind the scenes. So really kind of take a pause, right? And so some people have a bad day, right? And so, again, don't take just one bad day, really be an empathetic leader. Number two, and this is interesting, I just came from a conference, and women are over-mentored but under-sponsored. Okay, so just let that sink in, right? Oh yeah, we'll have mentors all day long, but no one's sponsoring us in the room when we're not in there, right? And so again, let's be intentional about that. And then again, break through the ceilings, guys. This is our opportunity. Break through the glass ceiling. For me, I have a bamboo ceiling, so I have to break through the bamboo ceiling and the glass ceiling. So lots of ceilings to break through. But if it's not us, right, then who is it? Right. And have the conversation. And people know, like, oh yeah, Andrew's like breaking through that bamboo ceiling, right? Like, but say the words, right? Because then that really hits people because it's like a visual, just like the iceberg thing, right? When you say those words, then people are like, oh, she's right, So those are mine.
Great. Nicole.
I'm gonna follow a little bit on Andrea's there with the women are over mentored but under sponsored. Sorry. I'll say that in that space, when you think about maybe taking on a mentor or a mentee, you kind of have to think of it in different spaces. Like a mentor is going to support you, but a sponsor is going to support you when you're not there. So they're the person who is going to recommend you for things. They're your champion. And if you can be the sponsor for somebody else, that's always really helpful. Similar to what you said, send the ladder back down. My husband and I have always thought of it as make sure if you get through the door, hold the door open for everybody else. So that's kind of a similar thing of, look, if my words and vote of confidence would help somebody, then I feel obligated to speak up on behalf of that person. So if you're in a mentorship space, remember, it's not just mentoring. Sometimes you also need to speak up and sponsor somebody because other people may not even consider that person. So you can
Well,
kind of
thank
act
you.
as an advocate for them.
Thank you, Nicole. So we're at the top of the hour. Christina.
Be really quick. I have three things, and it's all about enacting change. So I believe number one, we have to address it. We have to build awareness. We need to be brave. Number two, we need to create the mechanisms so that those who are less intentional have the opportunity to practice. And number three is supporting others around you. Just like Andrea and Nicole said, it's not just about the mentorship, it's about the sponsorship as well. And it's about making sure that people feel supported and feel safe. So those are my three things. And I think it's possible. I think we can get there.
I love the quick takeaways. So let's go back to the beginning of this session. We were talking about mind your cues, and if we created a new cue, which is awareness quotient, did you rank yourself on a 1 to 10 where you were with your awareness? Did you learn anything? I just want to leave everybody with that just to ponder. But I do want to thank you for coming on today, for your words of wisdom. Like I said, this is going to be a thing, intentional inclusion. Use it in your social media. Talk to people about it. Let's get it circulated and make a movement on it. We want to thank Christina for that. So Andrea and Nicole, thank you as well for joining and sharing your thoughts. Anything else? City, anything you want to say? Well, thank you for coming. Have a great day and happy holidays to everybody.
Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.